Welcome, everyone. Today we have beautiful Nellie joining us again. How are you, Nellie?
I'm good, thanks, Gabby. Thanks for having me on.
You're so welcome. So Nellie is a generational family survivor. She's a survivor of SRA, MK Ultra, and experimentation. And this is our fourth interview, Nellie. And Nellie's been just doing an incredible job highlighting the way the techniques that are used in terms of programming a child into a mind control slave. And she just has such an incredibly articulate way of explaining the memories that have come back to her, so we can really understand how they set these rituals and scenes up to program children. And I think my big takeaway from the last interview was it can be so hard when you're learning about the cults, just understanding how these people could do this to their own children within their own families. And Nellie was saying how they really see themselves as completely above humanity. They hate humanity, and it really has become about money, power, and control for them. And so I think the more that we can understand, the way these operations have worked in the past, the more we can be aware and even, recognize these things that are still happening in our communities at this time as well. And I think you're just so incredibly brave, Nellie, sharing your experiences and your memories to help heal other survivors that are just starting to learn about, the depths of their own abuse and remembering at this time, but also to heal our communities, because for way too long these things have went on and we've just had absolutely no idea. So I'm with you, and I pray that, by exposing these things, we can ensure that they never happen again. So when you're ready, let's begin. I think today we're going to talk about your experiences from when you were 11 till 13 years of age.
That's right. Thanks, Gabby. I'm going to be going back a little bit behind that again. I have to bring in another imposter that formed a trinity with my father and Pisani imposter, and his name was Brother Morris. He was an imposter of a man called Brother Morris, who was at a high school in the town that I was moved into when I was 10, just about 11. And so they formed a cohort that had been formed quite a way before. And I have memory of Brother Morris, imposter, at a gate on my way back from school. And he had a sneer, and he was getting my two younger brothers at the gate to chat to him. And I was programmed and knew that this was really dangerous. I was also programmed all the time to go straight home from school, not stop. Always just get home, just get home, just get home. And I remember stopping, and he ignored me, gave me a sneer, kept talking to my brothers. I biked a little bit further up the road, looked back. He seemed to know that I'd look back, and he turned and gave me another sneer. I didn't know what to do. I knew that worse things would happen if I had stopped and gone back. And so I just biked home, and my twin brother said to me later, my two younger brothers hadn't come home. And I remember remembering that again, because you can't remember every 3 to 15 seconds. And we're both standing at the door. My twin brother said, "We're not going to tell Mum." And I'm thinking, why would he say that? He was under programming.
Wow.
We did have a telephone, and I didn't really know how to use it. So I wouldn't have even known how to find her. She was working at that stage at a doctor's office, a GP. I didn't even know ever where she was, or if she even was there. That was the cover. And we waited, and then I remember going back to my room, standing there really anxious, not knowing why I was standing there, because he just wiped all the time. And eventually my twin brother came in and said, "They're here, they've arrived back," and they were rushing up the street. And he said, "Thank goodness we don't have to tell Mum, we're not going to tell Mum." And then later he told me that my little brother had woken up on a couch inside that man's house. So he'd been put to sleep on a couch, woken up at the same time that my youngest brother was being brought out of a bedroom. And they were both quite young. Yeah. So Brother Morris, the actual Brother Morris, when I was programmed to find him around 2016, go to the school and find a photo of him, and he was a football coach. He had kind of like an asymmetrical face. It wasn't symmetrical. It had a bend to it. And Brother Morris's imposter had the same thing. So I don't know whether they were twins at birth with the same facial defect, or whether they had found someone that looked exactly like the one that they were going to imposter. So this was also said to me later on with another thing. She won't know whether he looks like her brother, or they just found somebody that looked like him. So this actually happened back in the second town as well. I remember my father being very elated, and there was a boy in there that I just went, that's not my brother. He looked very similar to him. He had white curly hair, whereas at that time, my little brother, the most tortured one, had black hair. And my father was making fun of my mother for not knowing the right son or her own son. So this was said to be another twin separated at birth. So my mother always had cesarean sections. After her firstborn was born with a cord around his neck, so to speak, but it wasn't. He was killed. So then after she had cesareans, so it was made out that they had separated another twin, put him in Australia to lead a really good life for the first 20 odd years of his life. And then my father took me to something when I was around my early 20s, to a horrific event where he was blamed for it and went to jail. And he had a very similar sounding name. He had the same name as many family members.
Wow. Also premeditated for that role.
So I still don't know whether he is actually my brother, my younger brother's twin, or whether they did find someone that just looked like him and it was all a pretext of that, because they would have fun with things like this. You know, always playing with your mind. Back at that house where Brother Morris's imposter was, my little brother said that he was given a drink before he passed out on the couch. So yeah, that was like a 2-hour duration, so to speak. Yeah. So they don't actually work on a monetary reward system. They don't adhere to that in that system in society. So they negate all systems that are current, like the government system, the police system, and including the monetary system. They don't need money to operate. They just do day jobs to exist as a cover. They don't care about how they look much and what they wear. They just wear suits and things because that makes them look businesslike and authoritarian if they're out, and people won't question them, things like that, or different clothes, sporty looking clothes, usually blue or grey or black or white. Not many colours. But they also get rewards for their birthdays, and that might be a celebrity kill. And I can remember one in the second house that I was living in. I was around 7 or 8. My father knew it was coming on the TV before it was and what had happened. He walked me through to stand in front of the TV, and this was done quite often. I would be stood in front of broadcasts of murders and things like that by my handlers later on in life to see what I'd just been brought from. It was insane. Wow. And this particular one was a very well-known, huge celebrity, because what they do is they love taking celebrities off people because that's mass torture for people, mass sadness, mass
People feel the pain. Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
So this particular one happened on his birthday and was jumping up and down. The broadcast was happening, all the flashes of the musician, the singer, who was huge in the world. And he was jumping up and down and said, I can't believe it, they did it. They did it for my birthday. This is such a huge reward. They actually did it for my birthday. So what they can do to people very easily is cause them to have heart attacks, as I've mentioned before, with ketamine embedders. They can use caterers that these very wealthy people have around them in the ripple effect to bring things in. No one is in the know. It's all unwitting. They can have their handlers in there at any time because there's gaps through the drugging where they can walk in and out, people in and out, and your brain will just stitch that together. When you're in an awake state and then you're put under and then you're brought out again, you don't know that you've missed
time. You've lost that
those
time.
minutes, those hours, anything like that. You can be placed in another position and you'll be wondering, sometimes I was wondering, oh, now I'm here, this looks different. But you can't quite get it. You just, yeah, there's too much happening in front of you. So they can also put tubes down people's nose and feed them, make them obese, cause them to have an eating disorder. Anything can be done like that with what they do when they gain, and they can gain access to anything. If anything looks hard, they would tell me that they would just go away and think about it until it could be done. They would work out the whole, basically chessboard, move this piece, this piece, this piece to get in. My father would have lots of cryptics that he would say to me, like, a chain is as strong as its weakest link. This is cryptic 4. They can get anyone in, the weakest person to start with, in to start the other chain of events with other people, more people being drugged, right into the target. So it's all methodically done. So no, they don't, and no one is exempt. Like they say, they can just go away and think about it and work out how things can be done. Easy things are done for the rookies, like they're newbies. These are mainly suicides, quite easy for them to do. It's done in someone's house sometimes, or maybe in a park or something like that, or over a bridge. These are quite easy. So they'll start their rookies, their boys, with this kind of thing, training them to do those. And then they progress to the more and more. As they get higher in the organisation, they do more and more intricate murders, more people involved, more public places, more people under control, things like that. Yeah, so no one is exempt. I was also told that they coined the 27 Club, and that was quite easy, getting somebody on heroin. A lot of people in the music industry were already using heroin, and many, many times they got them killed at the age of 27 to create this thing about the 27 Club. So that was done on purpose. And then other people, the public, go, oh, there's something about the 27. You know, a lot of musicians died at age 27. Why is that? So they like to have that kind of attention, and media spotlight will bring it out every so often, and things like that. It's like a memento kind of thing as well for them.
Yeah, it reminds me how in the media they like to use the numbers. So like you're saying, the 27, like often there'll be, you know, you 66 and 666 in like these kind of ritual murders as well. And it's just another way of them, you know, laughing at us. Like it's like ritual mocking, because people can't see what's going on, but that the cults can all laugh about, oh, we've got this up on society at large. It's so interesting how you describe, you know, what they get out of this is just the death, to be able to like have that glee over someone being murdered on your birthday. Like, oh, terrific.
Yeah, so that's how they kind of get paid, by advancing to more things, having more famous people killed, all sorts of things. Another cryptic that my father would tell me, and this is when I was only 6, was don't believe everything you read, and then he'd laugh because it was all to do with what the media reports, what planting that they've left in the murder scene, or to convict somebody or leave it as a whodunit.
Yeah.
The media would report what the police find, which is set up for them to find. As I said, they call the police their cleanup crew, which is horrendous for the police to see these extreme brutal murders. And that's the one thing that runs through, that's a thread that runs through a lot of the individual murders that people keep seeing repeatedly and repeatedly, with so many different individuals doing such brutality for the first time.
Yeah.
Whereas it's actually this criminal organisation. I was just taken to too many to even, yeah, it was just horrendous. He'd also say other cryptics like empty vessels make the most sound, and he'd laugh at me. And that was him telling me, we're emptying out your brain, out everything you are, and replacing it with something else, and that'll be the most sound, kind of thing. Like an empty submarine makes a lot of sound. So you're emptied out. Yeah.
Wow.
And things like a little knowledge is dangerous. Like I would always be woken up for maybe up to 7 to 15 minutes, sometimes a bit longer as things got going. And I'd see a snippet of something, whether it was the actual murder, I'd see what was in the room or the place or whatever. I was programmed to know every detail from quite young. And then I'd be removed and just have that little bit of information. So he'd say things like that, a little bit of too little information is dangerous.
So they're never giving you the big picture, are they? Like it's just like
much later.
Such a little.
Not too much later. I always had to go in. As soon as I was woken up, I had to get on top of the situation very, very fast, try and work out what's happening. It wasn't always apparent to me. I didn't understand some of the things that were said. It was all scripted by the men. Yeah, it was extreme control. And I would have to get on top of things. And even in my normal life, when I was woken up to go to a school day, it would always be last minute. My mother was very robotic, or my father would wake me up to go somewhere very, very quickly. You wouldn't have time to think what had happened back there that you'd been woken up out of. So that was always, the pressure was always on to get on top of whatever situation you were. And that's the way you were trained from that huge anxiety and everything. Yeah.
It would be such an anxiety of just like, what am I waking up to? And I know when I speak to survivors, like quite often, as we wake up in the morning, it'll just be a feeling of absolute anxiety, like opening your eyes, just like what's going to go on. And no doubt this is because of all the times that people have been woken up and found themselves in awful situations. So that shock is still in the body until we release it as well.
So that's where my father's cohort came from. When I first saw them was the second town that I lived in. That's when I was brought around the 3 of them quite often. Brother Morris imposter, JP Pisani imposter, like one from a school, one from the medical hospital sector, and then my father from a school as well. So yeah, I never really learned deep sleep because of all the programming. Many times I would be woken up and the handlers would be circling me, kind of like, it would feel like sharks circling you. and you would be like being death stared. I'd be on a stool, my whole body would be floppy and my head screaming from the electric shocks. And I'd be made to sit on the stool in front of all of them, sometimes 12, sometimes more. And they would punch me repeatedly. And whenever they punched something, they would say a certain word. Eventually, in my 11, 12-year times, it was things like whore, slut, prostitute, stupid, anything like that. Useless, spineless. You'd have trouble sitting up, and then you'd have to keep sitting up, and this would go on for a long, long time.
Oh my God.
Over and over.
For a child.
They would get the younger boys to do it too, the new ones, the young ones that were a little bit older than me. And that's another thing that they did. They started to bring the younger ones, a couple of years older than me, 2 to 5 years older than me, around me more from 11 and 12, because otherwise it would look like, because they were getting closer to me, older men were stalking a schoolgirl or something like that. So this was
for attention
done, to make it look like maybe later on I was promiscuous, I had older boyfriends, things like that. One of them, my handler, was even called my boyfriend by my father when I was taken to a roller skating rink for a meeting with him, which I'll get to later, and he was surrounded by men in suit and other boys, but I'll get to that later.
So really there was like the three, which included your father, for want of a better term, that were kind of like at the top of the pyramid of this organization, and then they were controlling and training a lot of the younger, or less experienced members to do the same thing, to be able to do the same sort of programming. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So you never really learn your REM sleep, your theta deep sleep, any of that. And I still struggle with that today because nothing was natural. Everything was drugged. Drugged me to go to sleep, drugged me to wake up with all sorts of maybe amphetamines, whatever makes you feel like you're so. I was just in a state of perpetual exhaustion from all the programming that went on at night, after night, after night, and then woken up to another day. It's not, you don't sleep under programming. You're woken up to more horror and things done to you to get you into that mindset. I completely shut down. I remember being at school, always wanting to cry and knowing I wasn't able to. A couple of times I did go to the toilets and cry. Always felt extreme depression, anxiety around others, especially in the classroom. The classroom would just, the noise in the classroom would always feel terrible, like overwhelming. My ears would be ringing with tinnitus from the electric shocks. My head would be screaming. I'd often just want to put my head down in class. I had huge anxiety around my peers, the other pupils. If they asked me about my past, I would just stammer, and just, it was like a huge mallet clanging in your head, and you would just block and you wouldn't know what to say. You just stammer. Weren't allowed to talk about the past. They'd just give up and walk away. So it was kind of alienating. They would target certain friendship groups that I was put with. And this is what they do to many, many other children when they're targeting them to make them into something, or to whatever, make them look isolated from society, maybe have autism, things like that. They would target certain other friends that I was put with at the time that would come up to me, always approach me and become my friend, to then exclude me. So this would be done in nights at their homes before they came in. So then I would be excluded a lot. And then I would blame myself for not being a certain way. The anxiety just never, ever went away. I would try and pull my hair over my eyes to hide. I just nod to people when they made conversation or say yes. I had nothing to say. I was pretty much wiped a lot at that stage. I would freeze if I needed to go to the toilet. I wouldn't be able to move in class, so I would just hold on when I could have just walked out and gone. So yeah, anything to not bring attention to myself. It was extreme. Other teachers would make comments that I seemed to be in my own little world at times. So that was always a cover. So this happens to many children at schools, many, that it's extreme what they do. It's as extreme as you can get.
You can see how at the school, you know, a child displaying those kind of things would just get looked at as maybe having a behavioural problem or maybe having a social difficulty, or like you said, could it be autism or ADHD? And really, it's a very normal response to all of the trauma that you're experiencing outside of school hours, but it just doesn't get picked up, does it? And your little body would have just been so exhausted. Like, I just, you know, when I hear these stories of survivors and getting through school and high school and the whole lot, I just wonder, like, how it's done. Like, it just shows how resilient, you know, children are, just to keep going despite, you know, what they're living through. So it must have been a very trying time.
And not just at school, even at home, the games that my father played on me were endless. Like, for instance, when I just moved into the new home at age 10, not long after, like, it was always been switched rooms. I was moved back to what was called the sunroom. I remember being woken up by my father on my bed, and he's saying something like some swear words. Oh, and you really want to say these too? And he's repeating swear words, and he's gone out of the room, brought back a tape recorder. He's like, go on, go on. And he's given me a drink of lemonade. Go on, say some of these words and record them on the tape recorder. And I remember looking at him thinking, that's really strange. I don't want to do that. And then he kept leaving the room, coming back in, getting me to do it until I started doing it. And then another rush of drugging was in my system. And I kept saying the words that he'd said over and over. And then he brought my mother to the door to listen and brought her into an awake state. And she came rushing through and said, you're disgusting. I heard what you were doing. Give me that tape recorder. And she played it back. And then that was another reason for her to not like me. So these games were endless. They just went on and on all the time. So this is what a perpetrator in the family will do to targets.
It's just constant mind games, isn't it? And causing that division within the family dynamic as well. Reinforcing that trauma of, you know, always being separate and abandoned, and yeah, just outside of it. It's awful.
And even at the school that I was at, they would even bring in the young boy handlers dressed in the uniform at times. If I was given money to go to the tuck shop that day, my father would repeat 3 times, here's some money, go to the tuck shop, you can get something from the tuck shop. Other students would be lined up, and one of the handlers would be behind the tuck shop, in the tuck shop, in front of everybody. He's not even a student at the school, dressed in the uniform for that half-hour period. And I'd think, I know him. And then sure enough, he'd start eyeballing me in front of, like, out of everybody, I would be eyeballed. I'd get to the front, I'd say what I wanted, he'd get it, which is what I was programmed to say. And he'd say, enjoy your food. Like that. Enjoy your whatever. And the same would happen at the school dance. My father would let me out to go to the school dance. I think, why is he letting me go here? Because I wasn't really allowed to go to many places. I'd arrive, and then all of a sudden I'd see one handler, young man, maybe about 15, in a suit, another one of them also around 15 in normal clothes, and they would be handing out the tickets. And as soon as they handed me my ticket, and they would have one of the teachers there under, instructing her what to do, giving her instructions, her head's bowed, she's all under them. And I'd walk in and hand the ticket to me and then say, enjoy your dance. And then I'd realize, oh no, they're here too. And then I'd walk in, once they're out of sight, I would forget, and then I'd feel anxious, not knowing why I'm anxious. And then I'd notice all the teachers all around just sitting, staring like zombies. And then the kids, some of the kids were just going crazy with what was in their system. Wow. Just crazy. And yeah, they were making a mockery of it. Just normal things that people want to do. They mock everything.
Yeah.
Make it into a controlled environment. And this is their training on bigger and bigger places now to get under control, to do horrific things. Yeah.
Yeah, just to hear how they can access literally every part, you know, going into a school, into a tuck shop, into teachers, it's it's just scary.
Yeah. And another thing I can remember early on at that school I went to, which started at age 11, was there was a boy in my class that all of a sudden he walked outside the classroom. My twin brother followed him, and I knew I had to follow. And they just went around the corner just to the outside, to the right. And all of a sudden I saw my main handler walking really slowly in a circling kind of motion, staring at my twin brother, and he gave him like a hand signal. Next thing, my twin brother has started punching upwards this boy to the point that his whole jumper went over his head and he was suffocating. He almost died, and kept punching up. And it triggered me because it was identical to how my father had punched just before that, the boy in the cave that was murdered in front of me. And I remember having the thought, I don't trust him, my twin. I don't trust him. He's one of them. He's one of them. And then it was gone. And then so the handler was gone too. You can't remember having seen him. You're just left with the anxiety. And eventually our teacher came out, and my twin wasn't even reprimanded because the teacher was under. He had no punishment at all when it was a corporal punishment school. A lot of kids would get the cane for less than that by the principal, the brother at the time. There was a brother there that I'll get to later as well. He was under, and part of them as well. So it was a completely set up school. Mm. And what had happened, the setup with that happening with my twin and the boy in the classroom, and we weren't the only twins in that classroom. There were actually 3 sets of twins in that classroom.
Oh, that's a lot.
And the other classrooms, which were 3 other classrooms, had no sets of twins. We had 3, which was strange. They put us all together, and things would happen with these later. One of the set of the twins. So yeah, he wasn't even punished, and the teacher then helped the boy, had him breathing again. But the setup there was that just before that, we were brought out of the family home, and we had a school behind us. So through the fence was the school, and the boy was there with my 2 younger brothers. And as I was brought out, I saw a handler walking away from the situation. And I thought, oh no, he's one of them. Then he's gone. He's walked quickly. They walked very quickly away. The quicker, the better, because then you forget. And he had done something to one of my brothers before that, like a sexual touch, and made it look like that boy had done it, who was standing really close, because all of a sudden that boy said, I didn't do it. And I And I thought, what's he talking about? And next thing, he's hopped on his bike. My twin had arrived. He's hopped on his bike, ridden away, and I've just gone straight in. And my brothers apparently had told my twin that it was him that had done it. So this is what made my twin angry, and then programmed to remember to go to school and almost kill him, given performance enhancing drugs that made him do it, programming, all of that to do it.
Wow.
And then made himself look like a hero, because in those days, someone that beat up someone was made to look a hero. And I would see many of those other times where, say, an older girl would be in the recess area. I'd see her walking towards my handler where the bikes were, and I'd see a signal, him giving her a signal. She'd walk back and start beating up another girl so viciously. They were swinging each other around by their hair, like off the ground, swinging another human being around by the hair. This is how much drugging was in their system.
Wow.
Everyone sort of around like zombies at first, and then they're like cheering and things like that. It was all set up.
Wow.
Many times. Yeah.
It's scary to hear how much the schools are used within these programming operations, and I hear it again and again. And obviously, like in this case, it's that reinforcement that they can get away with anything. They're already learning that they're untouchable, even as a child, as they're being trained and programmed to commit these violent acts at school. There's no repercussions, and then that just continues and continues.
And they would also even be set up, especially if they were girls, with older men out of school for sexualization, and given drugging to do with that as well, even when they were only 11, 12, things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, because that was always being spoken about at that school as well. So all this stuff was always going on around me. It was just endless. Every time I went there, it was something and another thing. An exclusion, a fight, something awful, one of the handlers turning up. It was just all the time. And back at home, things would happen like I'd be brought out into the dining room where all my brothers were already placed around my mother. And as soon as I walked in, she would be talking about the writing of a letter that she was doing, always on an email, and how I walked in and one of my younger brothers said, "Can I lick it and stick it, put the stamp on?" "No, I'm not allowed to do that until your father checks it all. I'm not allowed to write to my family without him checking. But guess what? Today I'm writing to my family, and I'm going to get it away without him knowing." So she was programmed to say that, because of course it wasn't going to happen. And this was to bring her father over, which happened. So she got the letter away. She licked and sticked it and stuck it and put the stamp on it. And next thing, a month or so later, or 2 months later, her father from Scotland's come over. So this is the first time we've seen him. But the whole time he was there, apparently maybe 5, 10, 12 days, I don't know how many days. All I remember was him complaining that he'd been sleeping the whole time, enough to see his daughter that he hadn't seen for many years and have a couple of memories of her, but he was put to sleep the whole time in the house.
Wow.
To the point that I was woken up to him complaining about it. So this is but by the time he got home, he wouldn't have remembered that. He would have just remembered a few little things that happened and thought he'd had a great holiday.
They're just such experts with the timing of all these druggings as well, aren't they? Obviously, so much practice.
Yeah, that's why they originally were the Zodiac Killer, because it's the Zodiac watch as well as the Zodiac of the sky, placing the souls in the stars.
Yeah. really being able to manipulate time for people to that degree, isn't it? It's nuts.
Yeah, it's huge, the manipulation of time. That's one of the things that they really excel at. The drugging is all timed with different elements of drugging coming out at a certain time. I've been told that they use accelerating agents to make one drugging in front of the other. And then things time out. It's all meticulously done, scientifically done. And they've been doing it for decades.
Just, you know, we hear about all of this experimentation and the MK Ultra projects, you know, happening in institutions and that sort of thing in Australia, but it's absolutely mind-blowing to hear how this is happening out in our communities, and, you know, that level of expertise is being used within cult families, within schools, you know, within all sorts of just corporations. Like, I think that's, you know, something that we all really need to take away, is this is still completely active out there. It's not a program that's finished up in any way.
Yeah, even at the town local river spot in the community, my father would take us there. I remember once my mother turning to me under programming and saying, he's scouting for new families, and walked away. So I would see him handing out lemonade for all the kids, befriending all the families, the parents, offering them a beer that was drugged, juices for the ladies. I would see certain new, because all my friendships were forced by my mother. That was one of her job, was to get me forced to be a friend of another girl around my age so that they could then target that family more. I was used like that. I'd always be anxious and not know why. One particular girl at this town river spot, I remember looking at her face and it had like the set jaw and the clench, and I thought, and the eyes that were red and swollen and looking, and I thought, oh, she's like me. She looks a bit like me. And then feeling anxiety about that. Yeah, but that was my mother's job. She would always force me to be friends with other families' daughters that I didn't even like or didn't even want to be friends with. It was just really, really awkward, felt strange. And that had been done to me all my life prior to that. My mother would always present as over-friendly to people, very, very nice, as well as very, very anxious. And quite eccentric. She had a foreign accent, so that would make people think, oh, she's just a bit different. She was overly nice, because that's what lobotomies, dichotomies, I've said many words about it, do to people, make them quite docile at times, quite docile. Some of the drugging would make her a little bit angry at times, but she was just mainly robotic and often just spoke in a monotone, depressed kind of voice around me. She would just instruct me on what to do. She never talked to me about her life, her past. I didn't really know the woman at all. She never did anything with me, nothing.
Sounds like she was really just going through the motions, you know, like she was trapped in her own mental slavery as well.
She was, yeah. So we have really, really low self-esteem, which is chronic low self-esteem, until they start building you up again and you're drugged to be more of an extrovert, which I'll get to later. Yeah, but my mother would always sit on the edge of her seat. She spoke in a very feeble voice to my father. He would mock her all the time in front of us. Well, I was brought out to remember that. I don't know about my brothers or what was done when I was more under. I know they have still have a connection with them. and it's mesmerizing drugs that I was also given in the past, so I understand it. So if I had to go to a gathering around my father, I would be given mesmerizing drugs to talk to him and feel okay about him, whereas other times I would not want to be around him at all.
So
that's the thing that they do.
So that was to kind of keep up a public show of, you know, the family relationships being okay, etc., in the public eye.
And even in those family gatherings, my mother would still like clutch her throat, be very anxious. She would say things like, your father's always right, in the family home. This is a extreme white supremacist, patriarchal to the extreme organization. Nothing was left untouched. Like even my new school uniform, which was green, my father even woke me up getting my uniform out of the wardrobe, which didn't have much else but that in there, and saying, we're even going to take the colour green off you. You're even going to start hating the colour green, which I've reclaimed now. So back then I had a choice of two colours often. It was either red or blue, which was beta or delta. And this was also done to me at certain times that I'll get to later. So what they'd also do is they would inject you with spot-causing stuff to make you more self-conscious about how you looked and feeling bad about yourself before you went to school, when those times are crucial for people wanting to learn self-love and things like that. It's hard enough anyway, but they would make it really hard. And then later at different other times, they would do beautifying stuff on my face, like creams and everything, if they wanted me to be in a seductive event or something like that. So it was always scheduled how you'd look. From photos that I've seen over the years, my face would change shape. If it had been bashed with a book in front of it, some in the electric shocks would make it really swollen, and then 2 weeks later it would be half the size. So it was always, you never knew how you'd look. I was always kind of told to avoid mirrors anyway and programmed. So I would just quickly brush my teeth in those days, comb my hair and leave, basically, avoiding my eyes. You could not look at your eyes in the mirror. It was too terrifying from what they'd done to you. My eyes were very often red because whenever they put somebody under, one of the main things they do, even in people that are going to be killed, is they make sure the eyes are open. Every single one I was taken to, make sure the eyes are open, mine as well. Sometimes they would have me looking at lights, like red lights or blue lights, and my eyes would be very, very sore from that in my awake times and going to school.
Wow.
Awful feeling,
And
from
just
staring at ones.
just that affecting how people look. It just by affecting a way that a child is appearing, it's such an attack on identity as well, especially in your younger years, like your teenage years, early teenage years. It's such an important part of growing up is your identity and taking care of yourself and how you do your hair, how you present yourself, and like that was even really taken away by the programming. I guess is another way to control, along with the low self-esteem and the extreme anxiety caused by everything that was happening. So it must have just been such a trying time. Those years are difficult, I think, for all children growing up as they find their identity, but seeing the amount of trauma and abuse and programming that you're living through as a child, it's just, another whole level completely.
Even haircuts too, like they knew that I wanted to pull my hair over my eyes, so every so often They would give me a really bad haircut, like really short, so I couldn't do that. So they would get me to the phase where I would doing that, then they would take that off me as well.
Wow.
So it was just an awful feeling. Yeah. They even shower you. So the men shower you, the handlers. Yeah. Many times I was woken up into an awake state with them, with sometimes the shower head that they had would be like a hose, like a huge fire hose on you. They would do it in my ears as well, which would cause more ear pain because my ears were so attacked anyway. I couldn't have water, still can't have water going into my ears from all the damage that they've done. And my father did another one of the, which I'll get to it around 11, 12, where he actually poked another needle, sorry, a coat hanger that was sharpened into my ears to make it look like I was having time with school. But I'll get to that when it's, yeah, when the next event comes up at the end. So yeah, you're made to look like a doll. Like my father would always make references to these two dolls that I was given that just sat there. I wouldn't ever play. There is no play. As a child, you don't learn to play. You're basically treated like a, well, like a slave, but also like a militarized person, like a what's the word?
A very regimented program.
Yeah, regimented
Yeah.
soldier. So like a soldier, child soldier. That's how you're treated and how you're programmed. So there was no play or learning for me how to play with things. And I can remember back at the second house I lived in, my father had told me to go out and play, and he'd set up like a bucket and a doll next to it. And all I'd do is go and pick some rose petals, put them in the bucket, stir it and stir it for ages. I didn't know how to play. And then dip the doll into the bucket. That was it. And think, what am I doing? I don't even know how to play. So that was also programmed in me. Yeah. So you're made into a doll. Later on in life, they even removed all my pubic hair, hair from other places as well, just to make you into that, their idea of how you should look. It was always controlled. Underarm hair, things like that, it's all gone. So they would remove it with laser.
Wow.
Having someone else do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Under programming. And I would even see the handlers in there when it was being done, and they would know the person doing it and then leave. It was just insane.
It's just awful to hear, you know, that level of control over a young child.
Yeah. But my mother was very isolated. I can remember there was like a family on the corner down the road from us with children all around our age, all of us, older as well. And my father was making a big scene about going down to visit them. And my mother was saying that she wanted to go too. She wanted to find a friend in the new town because we just arrived, and she wasn't allowed to. So she was told to stay where she was and mocked and called names. And my father went down the road. Next thing, my younger brother went down. Maybe 5 minutes later, we all stood out in the hallway watching all this. And he's gone down. And all of a sudden, 10 minutes later or something like that, he's come back and said he'd knocked on the door to go in because he had another person there, friend his own age. And it was weird. He said that all the windows were covered in like black plastic or blacked out, and no one answered the door. And next thing, my father, and this was all done for my benefit, my father's come storming back in a rage, called him lots of names, that he shouldn't have followed him, stayed there. How dare he do that? And just the name calling went on, just belittling him. So this was for me to know in my anxiety at that, oh my goodness, what are they doing? What's he doing there? You know, the whole family's in there. So this was just for me to get to know what they were doing, which would come back later. Another thing my father did soon after the teenage girl came to see me in the new town, she found me and told me about, alluded to the pregnancy, alluded to my father as well.
This was this a babysitter, Nellie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And she disappeared after that. My father got very angry at me when I came back and told him. It was all set up anyway. I was meant to know. And after that, he immediately grabbed my twin brother and said, we're building a soundproof room. We're going to start it now. I was going to start it in a couple of weeks with some other men, but you're going to help me start it now. And it was the first time I'd heard of the soundproof room, which went up pretty fast. So it was built just maybe 50 meters away from our house in the backyard, backing onto the school, a separate dwelling, and it was meant to be soundproof. That's what my father said. And later on, I would see boys from the neighbourhood, including the house on the corner that my younger brother had gone down to, their boys, marched by many men in black suits, up the back of the school, which had a gate between the school and ours behind now where the soundproof room was, and marched in that way into the soundproof room. I would be taken in there. There'd be a pool table in there, pool cues everywhere, men that immediately when I looked at them, I kept thinking Navy, and also they were saying, why don't you wear your Navy suit? Why don't you wear your Navy suit to them? But they were in the black suits. They were Great White Brotherhood then. And they would sneer at me. I was the only girl there, it was all boys. My twin would be on the bed. My father would be belittling him, calling him a bunny and all sorts of names, that he was weak. The boys would say things like, we want to play pool or something like that. And then one of them, the men would say, who wants a pool cue? Yell it out. And one of the boys would say, me, I do. And they would start ramming the pool cues with boys bent over in front of the pool table, hurting them that way. And I remember I would always like wrench my hands when I was stood in front of these scenes back then. And at school, as an overlap, would do that as well, not knowing why. And I would think, I'm going to tell them, I'm going to warn them, I'm going to warn them. As soon as I wake up the next day and then think, why do I always forget this? And I would wake up the next day and be taken to see one of the boys in the schoolyard behind us and think, why? I know I needed to tell him something, but I can't remember what it was. And it would be the same many times. I can't remember what I was meant to say. Things like that. I know I need to tell that person something, but I can't remember what it was. That was also programmed. So there's no way out. There's no way to warn anybody.
Just out of grasp, you just can't quite reach it. And just thinking, like, how organized is it that your family home backs onto the school, had its own gate?
It was all set up.
Yeah, like how convenient.
The entry and exit.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be seen coming in and out of our home at all hours with random cars driving by. And then marched straight round to their homes in the neighbourhood. So these were families in the neighbourhood. He also used to do it to the neighbours. So certain neighbours would be brought in to be living next door to us. It was always set up. They would have young children. My father could make them leave when they needed to leave, go to another town, another family would come in. He would go next door, get to know them under drugging. He would take me over as the babysitter. I'd be sitting rigid in the lounge room after he had taken the mother and father out saying, don't forget your purse. And they at first would look like they didn't want to leave. And I was babysitting. I'm only 11. And two babies, one like not even 9 months old, 6 months old. He would then have them leave. He would leave. I would just be sitting there. All that would be in my head is that I'm babysitting and I'm feeling really anxious. What if one wakes up? I don't know what to do. What if one doesn't stop crying? Then I'd hear a noise. I'd go into the room where the babies were, and there would be my father in the corner, laughing and doing things with the babies. And then he'd send me back out and I'd sit down, because that's all you could do. You can't walk much further than what you're told. Sit down again, thinking something's wrong, but I don't know what it is. Then I'd be next door, it'd be after this. I don't know how long after this one happened, maybe months. And my mother's brought me outside to the driveway saying, your father's next door. I think he's up to something. Because she was programmed to say that. Next thing we'd hear a baby screaming its head off, absolutely screaming. Like the whole neighborhood would wake up if they weren't drugged, but everyone in the neighborhood and that street and everything is. Screams won't get anybody's attention. Everyone, the handlers are watching everywhere. My father would come running out of the house, doing his little boxing two-step dance on the way, glee, holding like a pin or a wire that had gone through the baby's eardrum. And then later on, the parents or the mother would be telling me, when I was again programmed to go over there, that her baby had ear problems, was taken to get, in those days when they did that to us, we'd have to get grommets put into our ears. That was the cover for that your eardrum, that your ear vessels weren't big enough, or that kind of thing, for all this drama to be happening with your ears.
Wow. And I've heard that so many times from survivors that they have had those, grommets procedures growing up repeatedly, often every few years as well.
Yes. I had one a year from the age of 5. I had 3 times. I had 5, 6, and 7.
Wow. And to know that that's often from damage that they've done deliberately. It's just horrific.
No one knows. No one even suspects. So my father would wake me up in the middle of the night around this time, 11, 12, 13, and he would spit in my face, call me whore, slut, prostitute. And this was because of his anger at his mother. Not only that, but also to set me up for my next phase in life, which was the trafficking under drugging, when I was taken to huge events and then put back into brothels where I was silenced and wasn't able to leave them for months and months and months, almost a year. And when I was older, still a child. So he would do that. And not only that, he would get my mother's yellow plastic glove, and he would have feces on a dish, like a plate, an eating plate. He'd bring it into my room, he'd show me, he'd tell me he's going to put this inside me. He'd make a big show of putting the yellow glove on, saying that my mother had made it easy for him by putting talcum powder inside the glove. I'd be sitting there and lying there in a paralytic state, not able to move because of the drugging, but awake. And he would put it inside my vagina and call me more horrific names. And this is an attack on motherhood and birth. That's how they feel about it. They want to do that to women because that's what their feelings are about birth and life and overpopulation and all of that they go on about as a reason to do what they're doing, because that's their belief.
So horrific. So horrific to a child.
And then I would be going to school the next day, feeling really itchy, halfway there because you rushed out of the house, not able to go back, had to go to school. Other kids would come up to me and say, "You stink." I wouldn't know why. Yeah.
So awful.
So it's another way of alienating you as well.
Yeah.
Creating that smell around you and amongst your so-called peers. Yeah. I always have trouble around Christmas Eve because around that age, I was taken to brothels on Christmas Eve, to the local brothel in the town by my younger handler and my father and other men, taken into the actual brothel where I would be taken a couple of years later and programmed to go in there and work in there, drugged. And they would make a big show when I was younger of how all the towels were folded in that rolling thing and how they were done on the beds in a sort of kind of like a decorative way, that they would do the flannels and everything and say to me things like that's going to be your job soon and things like that. I wouldn't understand. And then they would make me commit sex acts on men there that were brought there, and I would wake up the next day to go to school. I would have sores in the corner of my mouth that had just appeared out of nowhere, massive cracks, like bleeding, cold sores all over my lips. So this is when they started infecting me with things, which they do to a lot of us survivors. They will take us to the brink of death with certain ailments and infections and things, but that comes much later. Things like Hep C that you're injected with, and that to make you even more of an outcast, take you to the brink of death and then bring you back with their cures for it, which weren't really known back then, but they have access to a lot of knowledge that isn't released to people through accessing scientists and chemists and all sorts of people to get knowledge and then put them under.
So it's interesting. It really serves two purposes. Like they're able to experiment on these children within generational families with their drugs or their bioweapons and their solutions. But then it also serves to, like you said, to alienate, to just create that difference. You're different, you look different, you've got sores on your face, you're unwell, you're sick. You know, it's that further isolation. So awful, Nellie.
And also to train the younger men on you as well. So I was used as a training prototype for them. So it was said to me at some stage in my life, there's nothing that hasn't been done to you. Nothing that we've thought of so far that hasn't been done to you. So my father would also at the eating table, the dining table, I was always in the lowest hierarchy next to my mother on the left at the bottom. He would often, after school at this time when we were meant to be eating dinner, he would ask me how my day was. As soon as I started to talk, he would yell out, "Liar, liar," in front of everybody, bash his fist on the table. And I would just eventually just hang my head and not even want to make conversation at all. He would do that repeatedly. Any time that I was let out to eat at the table. Many times, most times I was fed through tubes in my nose, which created horrific damage to my nose that had to be dealt with by them later on, because they were worried that I wouldn't make it through certain things as my nose was so damaged from what they were doing repeatedly. And also my mother at that time would reach around and run her finger quite harshly down my spine to make me sit up straight, because the effect of a lot of the drugging and the electric shocks is to make you hunch over a little, lose control of your muscles a bit. Your tummy's can be quite protruded at times because of all the drugging and everything through your system, and the electric shocks, you lose all your muscle tone. And then it tightens after a while. So sometimes my face would look very swollen and flabby, and then it would tighten a bit. Plus you were starved a lot. Yeah.
Just the physical, destruction of a child's body during these processes, like, from the nasal cavities to, these bioweapons. It's just so horrific, the level of, just trauma that they're inducing physically, as well as all of the emotional and mental stress. It just astounds me that children's bodies are able to make it through these programs. It really does.
Yeah, they try to kill you many times. I was told much, much later that I had a twin who I think may have been another female on the other side of the world, and that they were doing the same to that person. And it was like a game to see who would make it and be the one to bring stuff forward about them and all of that kind of nonsense. So the fact that I've been speaking out here has made me feel lately that maybe that person didn't make it, and it makes me feel very sad. That
Just never.
Because they even do things like run you over with cars and all of that, which I'll get to later, which broke my spine in 3 places. So another thing that my father did was he had other friends from the capital city near the capital city in New Zealand. And he had them come up and stay in a big, large camper van, which he made a big show of getting it backed up to the back door as close as it could to the back door, with the opening of that massive camper van right next to our door, which was open. So it was a straight through. And he woke me up in the middle of the night. They had daughter and a friend of the daughter and a young son, and the parents were all in the camper van. I was brought out to stand in the doorway, no further, as he went up the steps of the camper van, kept coming back to tell me to listen to this, what he was going to do. And then I heard the girls screaming and no, and I was just wrenching my hands, wasn't able to move. And then the next day, both of them said that they got their period, but that they had already had their period. So it was a bit strange. And this was done many times, even at school camps, the same thing done. We'd be under, this was much later, when I was around 16, before I left school. 15, I think I was 15. And they did the same thing. They had the whole campsite under with all the school kids there, big pot making the food, handlers stirring the food, making eye contact with me. And then when we're all in the dormitories, coming in like pack animals and just climbing on the beds of some of the girls that were targeted, and I could hear screaming before I went out to it because of the drugging. And then they're saying the next day, like 3 of them, that they had their periods, and that was strange that they timed it so that they wouldn't get it on the camp. They knew that they weren't going to. And handlers everywhere doing the abseiling. These are the boys, the boy handlers that are older than me. Yeah.
Wow. And so that would have been used as just another training opportunity for them as well. So
easy. Yeah. All the teachers under everything. No one heard a thing. Yeah. Except my father was there, and he woke me up, shook me awake just before it happened. So he was there with the boys as a training. So my father would throw family and friend parties sometimes, and he would give me the responsibility of making sure that the kids didn't touch the adult drinks, which seemed feasible to me. Okay, these are adult drinks. So I would be standing guard near the fridge. I would see everybody arrive, everyone in an elated state. They're already pre-drugged. And my father would have them in the lounge room, surrounding him in a circle, and they're all mesmerized and pandering to him like he's a great person. Eventually I'd sneak another look, and I'd see him having all the people after he'd come and got the drinks, and I was given the responsibility of giving the lemonade, that was his favourite drink for kids back then. We'd all get to drink. I remember before going out to it, sneaking a look, and he had some of the people on all fours, acting like chickens and acting like cows and mooing, and some of them were standing up and hands up in the air and skipping up and down like children, and he was just controlling all of them.
He was like the puppet master. Yeah.
Control. And then it would only be about 40 minutes, these parties, like normal parties might go for a couple of hours or more. He would quickly then pack everybody off, tell them to stop and pull over if they felt they couldn't drive any further, if they'd had too much to drink. And then they were all done for the other handlers and men to go over to their places later and do things in their houses for more training.
Wow. It's just, your father just comes across as like just being such a mastermind in this whole programming, the way they're, utilizing all of these operations in the community. Like something as simple as like
they are all masterminds, so they're all given this knowledge. Yeah.
Jeez.
Hierarchical. So I can remember my father and JP Pisani's Imposter taking us on many trips to get the drugged milkshakes, and it was done so blatantly in front of me. By this time I was about 12, that they'd be in the front seat. One of them would go and grab all the milkshakes, trays for everybody, or the boys in the back of the car with me, and they would be blatantly pouring the vials into the milkshakes and stirring them up before they gave them to me and everybody else. I would get the first one, the special one, that obviously had different drugging from everybody else or the other boys, because I was being programmed to be in an awake state, whereas the rest of them wouldn't have any memory.
Like there's just no need for them to even hide it. They just know that you're not going to remember it. Everyone else is under around you. It's just, mind blowing.
And then I had another incident where a second cousin was made to go to the same school as me, and she came up to me and said, "I'm your second cousin," and told my twin as well. This is when my twin was still at the same school as me for 11 and 12 before he was taken to another school. And then we were going over to their house with my father, and my father would be in the kitchen helping the mother cook the food, so drugging it. And my second cousin would say, "Your father's so amazing. He's taken a special interest in my younger brother. He's a guidance counsellor. We're so happy that he's taken a special interest in him." And all sorts of things went on with that poor boy. Yeah.
It just shows how they know so well how to just infiltrate, these community groups or schools where they have access to children, and they know exactly how to play the part. The helper, he can be charming, he can, like offer drinks and invite you around for a party, and there's just such nefarious agendas behind all that as well. They're such professionals. Like you said, an actor. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion with the agendas too. Like, for instance, my younger brother had a birthday that was closer to my youngest brother. And I didn't know this because around age 11, my father brought me into their bedroom, my mother and his bedroom, and it was the first time I'd ever been in their bedroom, ever. I'm 11. And he's got my most tortured brother in there with my mother, mocking my mother, saying, "You don't even know your son's own birthday." And she's like, "Yes, I do." And my father's yelling, "No, you don't," like over and over repeatedly, really scary. Like, "No, you don't." He would be very scary when he yelled. His eyes looked like so hostile, psychopathic. And he'd say things like, "It's May Day." So for many, many years, I've always thought that my little brother's birthday was May Day, May the 1st, which was a war day. It was, something for them to like, and it wasn't. So for many years, I thought his birthday was May Day because it's what my father said. And he also said, and by the way, that's past now. That was a couple of months ago. So you've missed out your birthday. That's a month ago. So you're not having a birthday this year to my younger brother.
How cool.
And I couldn't believe it one day in my 20s when my younger brother said to me, a couple of times by then I had sent him something on his birthday, and he said, "You always do this. It's not my birthday.
Wow.
My birthday is such and such a date."
Just shows how much they can manipulate, an individual's or even a family's history through all this programming as well.
Yeah. So the first neighbours we had at this new town were packed off to leave and go up north under programming, and think that it was their own doing. And all of a sudden we're woken up and told we're going on a family holiday to visit them. And we've got up there, but on the way there, my father has insisted on sending my mother into the local chemist to get a vial of benzos, he called them. And we were in the chemist for quite a while till he came in and said he was going to cause a big scene if she didn't tell them to hurry up, wanted to get on the way. I remember she bought big white glasses at the time. That was a reward for her. And back out of there at the boot, my father insisted on taking them off her and putting them in the luggage. And there was an argument about that. And then we've gotten away, and my father didn't speak to us the whole way up there. She was trying to make conversation, and he was telling her to shut up in an awful way. This is on a family holiday. And we've got up there and been greeted by the family that used to live next door to us, that they had given us their dog, which my father had killed within a couple of months, shot it. They didn't know this, and that they don't even know we're there. So they're completely under. And the mother has 2 children, one that's about 4 years old and one that's a newborn baby. And she's tried to get lemonade out for all of us, and my father's instructed her, no, it's not time for lemonade yet. We'll wait looked at his watch, another hour, because everything's timed. And then pretty soon after that, he's got it out and we've all had drinks. And instead of my mother and father staying in the guest room, me and the girl, the 4-year-old, were put in the guest room. And the mother of the house was inquiring about that, and my father was telling her, no, let them do it. She used to babysit her. She was another targeted one, the 4-year-old, by my father. And no, we'll be fine on the floor in the lounge room. So my father put my mother on the floor of the lounge room or the couch, and my brothers as well. And everyone's been packed off to bed very early. I think it was still daylight. I remember going to sleep after drinking the lemonade, woken up in the middle of the night. My father's standing there at the bottom of the bed, has a little girl in front of him, doing awful things to her, taking photos. I'm woken up to see this. I can't move. Then I've faded out again. The next morning, he's packed us all up into the car as the parents are coming out saying, hey, we didn't even get time to have a drink last night. Maybe next time, hey, next time. And we've said goodbye and quickly been packed off, and we've gone to one of his cousins who's high up in the Navy, and he lived in a very wealthy place in Auckland called Rothsea Bay. And we've gone into their huge house, and I've been instructed to put my bathing suit on. And the Navy man, his cousin, is staring at me in a very lewd way. I didn't like it. And my father's got my brothers to go and run down to the bay. Then he's told me to go run after having a drink, run down to the bay, go as fast as you can. And as I ran down, I remember the sense of freedom and joy after the drink. and I've gone running so fast into the water, and it was all covered in oyster shells, which had completely severely cut my feet before I could stop. So I've limped back, and my father said to the cousin who's in the Navy, very high up, watch this, watch this. I can give her a drink and it's like magic. She won't feel the pain. So he's gone to the fridge, grabbed the orange juice that he'd brought over, given me a drink of it, still saying to the Navy man, see, you can do this too. You know, you can do this on your Navy vessels and things like that.
Wow.
And given me a drink, and then he's kept inquiring, can you feel it? Can you feel the pain? Eventually I couldn't feel the pain. It was like anesthetic. And I could hardly feel it, even on the trip home, couldn't feel it. And then I don't even remember my feet healing. So I must have been put under for a while till my feet healed.
That's so
constant.
so interesting, that scenario of your father literally almost doing a demonstration of the drugging on you to high up Navy personnel, isn't it?
And he said to him, I'll leave you some, you can have the rest of this and I'll get you more.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the cults work. Just get in and show them what they've got. Wow.
And he also had passed him, before that, he passed in an envelope of the photos he'd taken of the girl and said to him, the whole place is under now. We've got them under, and there's a young boy there. So this Navy man was potentially a pedophile.
Sounds like it.
With now access to a young boy in the house that was still a baby.
Oh, Nellie.
I used to often go to my bedroom when I was moved to being next to the toilet, which was the size of just a larger wardrobe closet. It was very small. It fitted my small single bed, and that's about it. That's all it fitted, and a tiny desk, but you couldn't open the door up, and it had most of it on the corner was a hot water bottle, hot water cupboard. So that took up a lot of the room as well. So it was a tiny room. And on my way there, he would time it. So he'd have the bottle of benzos or whatever they were, and he'd start shaking them madly. He'd go into the toilet with newspaper over a spoon and the benzos, and he'd be crushing them up while he was sitting on the toilet for sometimes hours, crushing up all the pills that were being put in people's food and drink, our drink, our food, whatever, ice cream, anything.
Wow.
Be drugged. He'd also bring me out to where he'd have, in those days we had metal wire crates with milk bottles, glass milk bottles in them, like a crate of 6 at a time, with little slots for each of the 6 bottles to sit in, and aluminium foil over the top. And he would have a syringe with him, and he'd be poking little holes into the milk on the corners, and then one he'd do right in the middle, and he'd say, they won't even notice that one. And then he'd say things to me like, I'm actually being really kind and good neighbour. I'm actually taking them to their front door for them. All the people in the neighbourhood, I'm delivering their milk to the front door.
Wow. So
he got the man that delivered the milk under, put him somewhere in his car where he didn't know that he had lost a whole night, put him under, and then taken all the milk everywhere to all the neighbours himself. Then wake the man up, wouldn't know that he'd missed hours, then to continue his job. Is that easy? This is everything that they do. One of the worst things that I saw by my time there, apart from the murder in the cave, was when I was woken up and taken to a car with Sel's nephew was driving, the imposter of Sel's nephew. His other name was John. He was one of the cohort with my father's trained men. He's a bit older than my handler, black hair, thin, white skin, very spotty. he was awful. He would do awful things to me, sometimes like smash my feet, my ankles together and things like that, cause a lot of pain. And he was driving. There was another one or two of them in the back seat, but I was put in the front seat. And they had a boy from my school who was a bit slow. I think he was targeted, possibly even given a lobotomy. He was quite slow. And they did a couple of run-throughs with him on his bike, and he had a handler with him talking in his ear, come onto the road, go back, do it again. We're just sitting there in the car watching. Then the cars moved a bit further up, got into the right place. Meanwhile, Sal's nephew, Imposter, is talking to me the whole time, telling me what's going to happen. Next thing, the handler's given the boy a push. My Sal's nephew, Imposter, has stepped on the gas and gone so fast towards him as he's being handled in the to start pedaling onto the road. He's hit the windscreen, broken his neck, gone over the car, and then the cars kept going around the corner. This was on a main road, so it was quite a busy road before school. And then I'm swapped into another car, and then I don't have any more memory, apart from then later on, months later, being at school, and the boy, we were already told that he'd had a really bad accident. And I remember just I'd had the slightest little feeling like, I know something, and then it would be gone. Next thing, he's brought in by his mother, wheeled in this massive wheelchair with lots of things all over it. He's got a thing on his head, and the only way he could communicate was slight nod of his head with a piece that he'd try and type something on a board in front of him. And this is for the rest of his life. The rest of his life, however long he would have lived after that, if he lasted a year after that. Many people don't, with these injuries that they cause. So he was quadriplegic.
It's so horrific.
And they really love that. They love creating someone like in a jail or made completely invalid for a long period of time. And they even said to me at times that they get more out of that than murdering somebody, because it's more torture for them.
Yeah, creating a lifetime of suffering like that is just so horrific for a young boy as well. My God.
And I remember when that happened and he was doing the demonstration of how he could now communicate with the prod on his, I remember feeling this wave of guilt. For some reason, I couldn't understand it. And then just the sadness, and then huge anxiety. I started to shake, like I couldn't stop shaking in class. And I remember the teacher looking at me and kept looking at me like, why is she shaking? Yeah.
Like you could almost get to something, almost feel that memory, but it just wasn't quite there.
And then it's not quite there. Good. So they're always letting me go to the brink of it, and then nothing. It would just be wiped. So another thing my father would do, he would encourage me, come into my room when he wasn't flinging open the door and death staring me, and he'd be really nice, and he'd say, I know you saw something that you liked. You can go and walk into town and go and buy what you like. And I'd already been taken with the handlers to see like a blue bag. There it is. That's what you need to go and buy, then put under. So I would walk into town on my own and go and buy this blue bag that I'd seen. It had to be blue, and bring it back. And then my father would come in and I'd show him what I bought, and he'd start screaming at me. How dare you? You're stupid. Why would you waste your money? Like all this, like scream at you over and over, and really belittle me for doing that, to the point that I didn't like my things. I wouldn't want to use them. And then I'd forget about that sometimes. No.
Wow. So you just couldn't win. You were being programmed to do this task, and then on completion of it, you just receive more emotional and mental abuse. Really attacked your identity as well.
Yeah, that's the Nazi thing. That's how they would treat people in the camps and things like that, because they would get fun out of it and make a mockery of people. And another thing he did was he told me to go and steal a book. And it was an Aleister Crowley book, and I would know it when I saw it. And I remember going into a very little bookstore and feeling really anxious and knowing that I had to steal this book and not knowing why I had to steal it. I had this urge to steal it. And then I'd look through the books, and then I'd see one would be facing outward, and it was an Aleister Crowley book, tarot card or something. And I'd look through, and the man who owned the bookshop had a handler in front of him, and then he'd zone out. And I think, okay, I'll put it in my bag now, wherever I put it. Walked out. It was all very easy because where I was taken to, they were already under. I remember coming home, putting it in my wardrobe, and next thing it disappeared. And my father had come and got it.
Wow.
Very weird, these things that I had to do. Yeah. And it got to the point where I didn't even remember that my father had told me to go and steal it, that I had done it myself. And then you forget about it. So more and more awareness was happening. By the time I got to 13, they were bringing me into more and more awareness of times when I was doing things that were kind of bad for me. Yeah, not their stuff, but making me feel like I was a bad person.
Yeah, giving you that guilt and that shame. Wow.
Yeah.
Would you say from what you've seen in your experience that, it was unusual for you to be being brought into consciousness at that age of 13 compared to the other children that were around you? Like, it sounds like everyone else was somewhat completely under, but you were being brought out as part of your programming. Is that right?
But I think that once my brothers went from my school to another school that they were programmed to go to, I don't know what happened with them, whether they had more awareness then, apart from me, because they were more and more secluding me, isolating me from my family members till the time I was 16, when I was actually removed from the home. So my brothers were then living more and more of an ordinary life, and I was completely handled. Unless I was around them, then they were also handled as well. But yeah, more and more awake time for them at a school to live more and more of a normal life with certain drugging done to them at certain times. That's my belief. Yeah. So I wasn't even allowed to see a doctor at that time. Even when horrific things were done to me and I had a lot of pain, my mother would refuse to take me to a doctor. So that was all part of the programming as well. I had severe asthma. I could hardly breathe. At times, my father was telling me he was giving me a pinprick of arsenic. He was mentioning cyanide, but this was arsenic. I don't know whether he did give me cyanide or both, but arsenic, tiny pinprick, enough to, it would cause a lot of, couldn't breathe. It was really, really horrendous. My nose was always, I couldn't breathe through it. And then other times they were jamming, soon after they jammed stuff up my nose, tubes. Sometimes I would be able to smell things, but mostly not. It would just close over in the times, days after the tube feeding. My father would often make very derogatory comments about my body at this age in front of my brothers, but they would always just stare straight ahead, and I used to wonder why they never stuck up for me and things like that, but obviously they were under. And these would be really derogatory comments. No girl should have to hear that from her father. It would make me feel very uneasy, not just about him, but also about my own body. They were bringing me into having no boundaries, basically.
Yeah.
So this is one thing that's always done to me. They always had access to my body. we have this thing with boundaries. You don't have boundaries. You really have to try very hard when you come out of this to find those boundaries. It's very, very difficult.
And that's really how they exert their control over a mind control slave, is there's just no boundaries. There's no perception of, you know, having that identity to say no, even because it's just been so conditioned out of you through so much abuse and trauma, like a mental, emotional, and then the sexual and ritual abuse as well. So it's just that constant layering.
Yeah. And they would also even like turn my brothers against me with set up things. So I can remember one time my father bringing me and my twin brother. By then my younger brother was in the sunroom, just sitting there propped up against the headboard. And my father said to me, not my twin, you have to punch him really hard. And he went and demonstrated punching him really hard in his stomach. And he didn't move much, my younger brother. And then my father kept shaking him awake and clicking in front of his eyes and said, if I didn't do it, worse would happen to him. And I had a huge fear, like programmed to know what that meant. He's like, do it now. And I remember just standing there. I couldn't. I remember getting my fist and just going like that. And he's like, useless. Have to do it like this, like I did. And then he's left the room. And I remember thinking, I've got to do it now. I've got to do it now. I've got to do it now. Or something bad's going to happen to him. So I remember punching him. And then years later, he had that memory. He came to my house just before the last split off of all the family on a family holiday that was programmed, and brought it up. And at that stage, I didn't have the memory. I didn't remember what he was talking about. Thought I would never punch you. And yeah, a couple of years after that, I had the memory.
Wow.
It was all done in stages. Yeah.
There's so much shame and guilt that's laid into survivors under, you know, the pretense of what they've been forced to do to other children as well.
Or worse will happen, it's always said, or worse will happen. It's like the better of two evils. What do you do? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that can be a really big thing for survivors to work through, is just understanding that you were controlled at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And releasing.
Then when I did punch him, I had more of a release of more drugging in the system. It's all timed. So I actually had the energy or whatever it is to punch him. Whereas the first time I wouldn't have been able to. I just didn't have it in my arms. You're very weak under certain drugging, and then it's all timed. There's more drugging to come through that is more anger inducing or amphetamine based or something like that. It's all timed. Multitudes of cocktails of drugs in the system.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's just a no-win situation, because you know if you don't do it, that you're both going to be punished as well. Mm-hmm. So, that's the programming of, being obedient and then wearing the shame and the guilt constantly as well.
And around 12, also my father said to me that I'd had something called, he termed rebel training, which apparently is when you have someone telling you to do something, one of the people over you, and your initial thought will be, no, I'm not going to do that. And then after a night at sleep, or how many days later, they come at you again with the same thing, and then you're doing it. But your first initial reaction is to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And that happened many, many times through my life with different people. And even things with butchering your body, if they wanted you to have a breast enhancement or something like that, and you're programmed to do that, you're thinking, no, I definitely don't want to do that. And then you're forced into having it with more coercion, and worse will happen if you don't, and things like that. So they can make people do anything, basically. But that was my training early on. And then he'd get me to go and buy some school shoes. And in those days, they were camel nomads. And everything had meaning. Everything that you were sent to buy or have, they'd bring in different meanings with it. And then he'd point to them late at night when he'd woken me up and laugh and say, you bought camel nomads, you're going to be a nomad, you're going to be wandering the earth homeless. That's what that means. That's going to happen to you one day. I would also have thoughts around that time, because of what he was saying, that I wanted to go and live in a cave and die in a cave, because it was them programming me about the murder that they'd done in the cave just earlier when I first started school. And I came from that to having to start school, the new school, and get on top of that as well when I was shaking and everything in front of new people, making it look like I had huge anxiety to start with. No one would know any different.
It would be so easy for them to just, show a cover of these children being, it's socially inadjusted or anxious. And really, it's just that reaction to everything, all the programming that you're enduring at that time as well. And nobody asks any questions because, how common is it for a child to be overly nervous or overly quiet or a bit withdrawn?
Really shy, yes.
Yeah.
Can't look at people in the eye, can't make eye contact, all of that. So around this time, they got a friend of mine to come and lure me to the roller rink. And before that, my father had said, you're going to go and meet your boyfriend today. You've met him before, but you won't remember. He's going to be there. And it was my handler at the roller rink. And when the DJ put the music on, I can't remember what song it was something like Eye of the Tiger or something horrible, or Duran Duran song, he came up to me and took me around the roller rink, holding my hand, and then let go. And when I looked, there was a man in a suit with him and another boy. So they'd been brought there for that meeting. So that was it, and that was all videoed and things like that, as the first meeting in my awake state with him. Wow. But I did not know who he was, just that he looked familiar, that I was fearful of him. But yeah, I didn't know why. And that I had to do that. I had to let him grab me by the hand and lead me around the roller rink. And then I was always programmed, never remember his face, things like that. That would be my programming in the nights. They would put different men in front of me and I would have to repeat, I never remember your face, each one, again and again and again. That was part of the programming.
And that's
so that have an effect on you in your other more awake state, day to day, when you're let out.
Yeah, and so many survivors report having problems remembering faces for a very long time as their memories start coming through. So that's so interesting that is set up as a specific program as well to serve the abusers to remain anonymous.
And then my father did a horrific thing to me just before another event as a cover for an awful event that I was taken to. He was in my wardrobe and he grabbed one of my coat hangers and he was telling me what he was going to do with it, into my eardrums again, and that he'd done it before to me, but not with the coat hanger, how he was going to sharpen it. And then I remember my mother and younger brother was brought into the bedroom, and all of a sudden we could hear a noise coming from the garage of sharpening metal on metal. And I remember having huge anxiety, like something bad's going to happen. I don't know what it is. Something bad's going to happen. My mother's questioning, what is he doing? It sounds like he's sharpening something. He's really sharpening something. He was in sounded like he was in a rage doing it, like really fast, metal on metal. Next thing I was woken up and he'd placed the sharpened coat hanger with the sharpened metal. It was usually the prong had been straightened and it was pointing to my bed. I remember looking at that quickly picking it up, turning it into a shape, and it cut me a little bit on the hand from the sharp, put it back in my wardrobe. And then either that night or another night, there he was next to me in the bed, crouched down, telling me what he was going to do. And it went into my ear. And when I was next woken up, the damage and the effect, the pain was absolutely horrendous, to the point that day after day that I was woken up with this, I just wanted to put my head through the wall. The pain was so extreme, and the noise just booming in my head. Horrendous. I couldn't stand up without the whole room tipping and falling. My father was coming in at times to give me medicine, and I'd go back to sleep, brought out again into more pain, to the point that one day I just decided, it must have been programmed, I was still in my 90, I'm just going to run out onto the road and get some help, get someone to get me to a doctor. And right then he came in the room, so it was already programmed for me to wake up and think that, and there he was, and gave me more medicine. And I was off school for a number of weeks, months, and during this time I was taken over to Australia, and I remember I was underdressed. It was a bit cool, but not as cool as New Zealand. That was freezing. And I was at a campsite, and they had a lot of people, men, adults, women, standing up like zombies in a sort of area. And all the handlers were around them, putting them under, waking them up. Stuff was said to me that there was going to be a dog or something they were bringing in. I remember having fear about a dog, but that wasn't done in front of me. It was only just a quick little snippet. And then the next thing I remember is months later, being taken to, it was said to be Australia by my handler. It looked like we're in a desert. And I'm walking over sand that's very, very hot on my feet, thinking I'm stupid, why haven't I got shoes on? It's also programmed. And he's taken me to a spot where there was a wooden hatch over a mine shaft. And I've been told this, and I'm being told to go down the ladder that was in the mine shaft. And there in front of me was Doc, and he had a baby with him, in a christening dress, talking about the christening dress. And he had a syringe showing me how he's taken blood from the baby to spray around her clothes later. And I'm looking at the baby, and the baby looks maybe about a year old, 10 months, a year old, I can't really tell. Eyes open, and I'm thinking, is the baby alive? And I could see the slightest flicker of the eyes. The baby's been drugged, not making any sound. And next thing, there was a flurry with a knife with him, and there's blood everywhere. But I was put down and woken up. And then he said, you did that. And he's pointed, and I didn't want to look. I could just see in the corner of my eye a lot of blood. It could have been from the syringe. He might not have hit the baby with the knife. Could have been with the syringe. I have to think that, because otherwise I got crazy. And then he said, you did that. I remember thinking, no, I didn't. I didn't do that. And it was very hot in the mine shaft. And then he's telling me more things about planting clothes, all of that kind of thing. And then I remember nothing, just not even being taken out. And I remember I had pink shorts on at that stage, the same colour as my dresser that my father painted, that would later be the same colour as my maternity dress when I was taken around millions of babies and children. They would dress me in that same pink maternity dress.
Wow. So that colour was just used as a theme, as a way to continually bring back those older traumas.
Mm-hmm. I remember Doc would always speak in the same kind of droll, monotone voice. And then the next thing I remember was back in New Zealand, my father had let me out and my whole family and set up towels and there was kind of like a tent, and he had puzzle books for me to do as part of my training. And there was a news broadcast that he was playing, like the radio was on, and it was a news broadcast from Australia that police had decided to charge a mother with killing her baby. And I remember as soon as I heard that, my mind went, she didn't do it. And then I thought, oh no. And I felt this thing of guilt inside me, and my father's standing there laughing at me. I remember I had red shorts on then. They dressed me in red shorts, and he's standing there laughing while this news broadcast was read out and saying things about it to me. And then I remember starting to feel, I know something about that, then it was just gone. And then before that happened, I remember feeling extremely depressed. So before the news broadcast, and I had been woken up, sitting on my bed, or gotten out of my bed by my mother, and she's saying, it's before your birthday, but your father's decided to give you an early birthday present. He's seen some roller skates for you, and you've got a choice of red or blue. And my father's come in and he said, it doesn't matter what you choose, red or blue, doesn't matter. And I remember feeling extreme anxiety. I remember thinking, I don't want either. I do not want either. I don't want them. I don't want red. I don't want blue. And I remember my mum kept coming back to check on me to see what colour I wanted, and I couldn't say. And in the end, under pressure, I just said blue, and I got blue skates. And it was before an apparent birthday that I don't even remember, but I was 11, 12 at that age.
It's interesting how those colours have just constantly appeared through your programming as well, isn't it? Just the choice of red for beta, blue for delta the whole time.
Delta witness, yeah.
Yeah.
And much, much later, I was told by my father that his God, he'd always speak about them as his God, whatever, wanted to put the father in jail as well. That the father of the girl, the baby, he wanted to have him put in jail because he'd really angered him. And it was something to do with, he was professing to be a man of God, which really angered him because they were the only ones that were allowed to be God or anything close to God. And that the cryptic was laying in a chamber, which means death. So they always use cryptics in their kills.
Just another way for them to communicate about what they're doing as well, isn't it? Like with the numbers and the words chosen, how they're described in
they make fun of names, they mix them up, they use similar sounding names, bring back mementos, all kind of cryptics, ones that sound nonsensical, teamed with a place and the name of someone that was killed that makes a relevance to something nonsensical or mocking it. And there's lots like that I'll bring out later that they did, but I have to be careful with doing that because of the people involved. So it makes it hard. And around this time also, I remember being in the classroom, and it was just after my ear had healed. So I was back at school, and the kids had noticed I'd been away for quite a while. And one of the other twins in the classroom had come to the door, and I was just in the classroom, the only one. It was lunchtime, and I'd been slow getting out of the class. And he was asking me to play chase or something. And he was standing in front of what was like a little pool of water that was left by the door. And as I went to chase him, he'd gone to the left. And as I hit the pool of water, I skidded to the right, and my head went straight into the concrete side of the classroom, which was concrete. Split it open, the blood everywhere. So this is how meticulous they can be. Then all of a sudden, my twin brother has appeared out of nowhere because he's been sent. I've seen a handler walk away from him. And he's said, I'll get you up to the principal, which was a brother at the time. As soon as we went up there, the brother came out and he said, I'll take her straight to the hospital in my car. And the receptionist has said, no, we'll just call an ambulance. That's what we normally do. And he's insisting, no, I'll take her myself, which never happened. And he'd also said, hello, Julia. He knew my name. And I thought, how does he know my name out of all these hundreds of kids? I've never seen him anywhere but from afar. So he's put me in the back seat of his car and I'm bleeding everywhere. He doesn't seem to care. He's taken me to the hospital. The doctor's in there saying, I'm going to call him. For some reason, the doctor knew that my mother was a nurse, which was very strange. I thought, that's strange. How does he know from my name that my mother's a nurse? And he's like, I'll call her mother. And the brother said, no, I'm calling her father now. And he went straight to the phone, which was in the room, picked up the handle and dialed a number straight away. And I thought, how does he know my father's name off by heart? All this is later wiped. And he said a few things in the phone. About 10 minutes later, my father has arrived. By then, I'm starting to be stitched and my father's very intent looking at me. The brother has left, and before he left, the brother touched my shoulder and said, just forget it, just forget it, just forget all of it to me. And he's walked out. Very strange. And then I was stitched up. I remember not even being able to really feel it, even when he injected. So obviously I was under some kind of anesthetic anyway before that happened. And yeah, had stitches in my head that I can still see.
Jeez. And again, they're even able to manipulate and control the medical system, the hospitals.
So this is all part of their training. Getting someone to have an accident, putting water there, being lured this way, so they will trip this way. And yeah, it's all meticulously done. And then I remember when I was around 13, my father went into school to make sure that he had chosen my electives, which were setting me up for later on in my life. One was typing, one was so that I would be able to type much later on, part of my destiny. One was clothing, which they like to make the women in the house doing. He would often make fun of my mother and mock her when he was taking me out with the boys to get drug milkshakes and say things like, go and sew a button on, go on, you're just a button lady, go and sew a button on, like very demeaning about that kind of thing. And technical drawing, when I wanted to do art, but I wasn't allowed to do art. But that was also set up for me to start being allowed to do technical drawing. And then later, when I was programmed to be at university for a long time and taken to many things with many breaks at the university for more things that I was taken to, and 3x3x3, that was also part of it as well, setting up that destiny.
So they really controlled exactly what streams and what courses you were headed towards.
Everything is controlled.
Early age.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that I spoke about last time was the first time that they'd done a murder in their home country in New Zealand, and family member had wrapped up a woman's body with copper wire. A few years ago, what they did to bring this memory back was they got somebody who was Polish to come to my house. Even when I'd rung up and said, don't come, I was going to teach something to them. And he'd left a big, huge coil of copper wire at my front doorstep. And I remember going to it feeling hugely triggered when I saw it. And then looking around thinking, I'm being watched right now. That's really weird. Why would he leave all that at my doorstep? And then taking it, eventually putting it in the bin. Yeah.
Wow.
And when I was taken to that one, I said I was 6 months, but I was actually 18 months old. And the woman's name rhymed with Jew. And I was Julia at that stage. So they were using rhyming names, and her birth date was the same date as mine, just 6 months later. So the same birth date was, for me, was her death date when she was killed, but 6 months later.
Yeah, and the cults really love to play on that with the numerology and the
Numerology.
dates as well. Yeah, just to continually bring that trauma and suffering, magnify it.
So my father would often say how interested he was in numerology, but in the end, they were going to use every date in the calendar. So that's how many different kills they would do, every date in the calendar and more, and sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 on one particular date. And I was told that their organisation made a deviation back in the 60s into what they were doing. So they were part of another group to start with, MK Ultra type group, even though I was told there's no such thing as MK Ultra, it's just files, but a group that adhered to that with a contact in the CIA where they got a lot of the files and everything, the MK Ultra files and torture techniques, and then did all the investigations into the druggings and the timing of the druggings and the amount, everything meticulously done to create a certain effect in a person. It was all done, but they had deviated from the original because they didn't want to go down that path. They wanted to do their own, where they started with the Zodiac Killer and all of that. But before that, so then they would go into the USA to train a lot of their boys and men into doing what was blamed on serial killers. And how they would do that is they would get a patsy, someone with a bit of a history, or they'd created the history quite a while, all set up, and they would take him with them on the kills of prostitutes and things like that. To create a serial killer, they would leave evidence there that would point to him or wake up a witness. In many cases, that person would think it was them doing it, because when they're actually doing a kill and they've got somebody under hypnotics, making them stand over the person that's being killed, they will have their hand coming behind them, making it look like it's their hand with the implement that's doing the killing in their ear to tell them that they're doing it over and over until they believe that they're completely indoctrinated to think that they are capable of doing that through programming in their thoughts.
And so we'd have just so many innocent people in prison that believe that they've done these horrific crimes, and it's all been set up. It's just awful to think of that suffering.
Yeah, sometimes they want people to think that they have done it. Other times they want them to not believe and then be stuck in a prison situation, knowing that they haven't done it, but they're not believed. It's just as horrific as thinking that they have done it.
An awful
way to spend your life.
Yeah. And meanwhile, these cults are just, it's like the mocking, the ritual mocking of just being able to laugh at controlling people to this degree, because people for so long, we've just had no idea that these techniques were being used, that the drugging was being used, that the media was being used to really just all collude and protect these cults and their operations. And it's just astounding even to think that they consider the police their cleanup crew. It's just all of these public services are just so infiltrated and being used by these horrific networks. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your incredible recollections, your memories so vulnerably. And I know it's helping so many survivors to understand the various events that they've lived through in their lives, and how we've worn so much shame, we've worn so much guilt for so many decades and been so silenced. And now by speaking out about our stories, by sharing how the programming's worked, sharing what we've learned, we can all heal together and really connect those dots. And I'd love to just see survivors continuing to find their voices and speak out, and just knowing that you're not alone. Like, there's so many of us remembering at this time, and for the first time in ever, really, I was going to say in a very long time, first time ever, we've actually got a space, like people are beginning to listen to the truths that survivors are bringing forward. And I think that's just such an important part of our community's healing, of individual survivors' healing, and finally we'll be able to protect our children. So I just wanted to thank you, Nellie, from the bottom of my heart for all you're doing to share your story. I know it's not easy to go through and, you know, recollect all that trauma, and you know, we're so proud of you and so supportive of what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Gabbi. Thanks. I might just have a little break and come back after a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
so thank you.
I think that would be wonderful, and we'll continue on from then after you have a break and are refreshed.
Thank you.